The first time my son called me a burden, he didn't even have the decency to say it to my face. He said it from the front seat of his car while I stood on the porch holding a grocery bag in one hand and a key in the other, trying to decide whether I was more shocked by his words or by the fact that my own daughter was sitting beside him nodding like he had just said something wise. "I'm just saying, Mom," he told the windshield, not looking at me at all. "At your age, maybe it's time to stop pretending you need a job. At your age." As if I had turned into a piece of furniture the minute I crossed 65. I was 68 then, widowed, healthy, and very much alive. My name is Margaret Ellison, though everybody has always called me Maggie. I had buried my husband 3 years earlier, raised 2 children, kept a house running on love, coffee, and sheer stubbornness, and still had enough strength in my hands to carry my own groceries up the front steps. But to my son, Daniel, and my daughter, Renee, that didn't count for much. In their minds, I was supposed to sit quietly in my little house, bake when asked, babysit when needed, and sign whatever paper they put in front of me. What they didn't know was that 6 months earlier, I had taken a part-time job at a small home and garden store on the edge of town. And what they definitely didn't know was that by the time they came knocking on my door with panic in their eyes, I was the one person in the family they had left to call. That morning on the porch, Daniel finally turned and looked at me with that half smile he always used when he wanted to sound kind while saying something cruel. "It's not that we don't respect you, Mom," he said. "It's just, you don't need to be out there embarrassing yourself. People talk. People talk." As if I had taken up skydiving in a sequined jumpsuit instead of a 4-hour shift helping customers choose flower pots and patio chairs. Renee tucked her hair behind her ear and offered me the tight smile she used when she wanted to appear gentle without actually being gentle. "You've done enough," she said. "You should enjoy retirement. Travel. Read. Rest. Rest." That was her favorite word for women like me. Rest. As if a person who had spent her entire life caring for others should vanish into a recliner and wait to be thanked. I remember standing there in the afternoon heat, staring at my own children and thinking, this is what grief has made of them. Not better, not softer, just greedy in a new way. I had no idea then how much worse it was going to get. 6 months earlier, the idea of getting a part-time job had started as a joke. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea going cold beside me, staring out the window at the maple tree Frank had planted the year our daughter was born. The house was too quiet after he died. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. The kind that makes your own thoughts sound louder than they should. I had spent 3 years pretending I was fine. That I was adjusting. That I didn't miss the sound of his boots by the back door or the way he hummed when he fixed things that weren't really broken. My children visited often enough to call themselves thoughtful, but every visit felt like an inspection. They checked the pantry. They glanced at the medicine cabinet. They asked casual questions that never sounded casual. Who helps you with the bills? Do you feel safe here by yourself? Have you thought about downsizing? Downsizing. That was another word people used when they wanted your life to become smaller so it would be easier for them to manage. One afternoon, I mentioned to my neighbor Dolores that I was tired of sitting around. She set down her pruning shears and said, "Then don't." It was the simplest advice I'd heard in years. Dolores was 71, wore red lipstick to the grocery store, and owned a Shih Tzu named Elvis that barked at squirrels with the fury of a police siren. She worked 2 mornings a week at a bakery because, as she put it, "I like bread, and I like being around people who know how to smile before noon." She said it like that was a perfectly normal thing to do at her age. That conversation stayed with me. A week later, I saw a sign in the window of a local home and garden store called Willow and Root. Part-time help wanted. Flexible hours. Friendly environment. I stood in front of that sign for a full minute before going in. The manager, a woman named Tessa with silver streaks in her dark hair and a voice that somehow made every customer feel like an old friend, asked me if I had retail experience. I told her the truth. I used to manage a household, raise children, balance a checkbook before computers did it for us, and keep a husband alive for 42 years. If any of that helps, then yes. She laughed, and I liked her immediately. She hired me on the spot. I started with 3 afternoon shifts a week, mostly helping customers find plants, candles, planters, and outdoor decor. It sounds small when I say it now, but for me it was enormous. It was the first time in a long time that somebody outside my family looked at me and saw a person instead of a problem to solve. There was a young cashier named Bree who loved to talk about true crime podcasts, a retired teacher named Mr. Alvarez who came in every Thursday to buy herbs he never remembered to water, and a widower named Howard who spent 20 minutes one day deciding between 2 bird feeders like it was the fate of the universe. Human beings. All of them. Real ones. Not the polished, impatient versions of my own children who only seemed to call when they needed something. I loved the work more than I expected. I loved learning the store system. I loved seeing the same faces each week. I loved earning my own money again, even if it wasn't much. And I loved, most of all, the way my back straightened when I put on the little green apron that said Willow and Root across the chest. My family hated it. Not in the beginning. Not openly. At first they made jokes. Renee called one evening while I was folding dish towels in the laundry room. "Mom," she said, laughing a little too hard, "please tell me you're not really standing in a store trying to sell flowers to strangers." "I'm helping people," I said. "Right," she said. "Helping people buy decorative mulch." I let that one pass. Daniel was worse because he always acted like he was being practical. He owned a small construction business that looked successful from the outside and survived on borrowed money and constant panic behind the scenes. His clothes were expensive, his truck was always clean, and his bank account was apparently a mystery even to him. He started dropping by unannounced in the evenings, asking if I was tired, asking if I was eating enough, asking if I might consider giving him the garage refrigerator because you don't use it anyway. Then came the questions about the house. "It's a lot for one person," he said one Sunday, standing in my kitchen with a coffee he didn't finish. "You know, Mom, this place is worth something. If you sold it now, you could move into one of those nice senior communities. Somewhere with activities." Activities. I nearly laughed in his face. He made it sound like I was an orphaned cat who needed to be placed in a sunny room with toys. "I'm fine here," I told him. He shrugged. "For now." For now. That was when I realized the conversation wasn't really about concern. It was about control. Renee started showing up with pamphlets from assisted living centers. Nice ones. Clean pictures. Smiling old people in sweaters. She would sit at my table and point to the monthly rates like she was planning a vacation. "You could have your own little apartment," she said. "And they'd manage the laundry and meals." "I can manage my own laundry. You know what I mean." Yes, I did. What she meant was that if I left the house, they could sell it. If they sold it, they could move pieces of my life around like furniture. They could tell themselves it was for my own good while collecting the benefits. I still didn't think they would actually do anything dishonorable. Not then. That was before I learned what desperation can do to people who already feel entitled. The first real crack appeared in late February, when Daniel asked me for $15,000. He came over after dark, which should have warned me. My son was never serious at night unless he wanted to confess something or ask for money. He sat down at my table, rubbed his face with both hands, and told me he had a short-term cash flow problem. "Just a bridge loan," he said. 3 months. Tops. My brows lifted. "From me?" "You've got savings." Not a question. A statement. I set my mug down carefully. "Daniel, savings are for emergencies. This is an emergency." "No," I said. "This is bad planning." He stared at me, offended in that wounded way men do when they hear the word no from a woman old enough to be their mother. "You don't understand what it takes to keep a business running." "I understand enough to know that asking your widowed mother for $15,000 is not a sign of healthy business." He stood up so fast, the chair scraped the floor. "I knew you'd do this." "Do what?" "Act like I'm some stranger." That one hurt, because it was almost clever enough to disguise itself as truth. "I am your mother," I said quietly, "which means I am not a bank." He left without another word. By the next day, Renee had already called to tell me I'd been too harsh. "He's under a lot of pressure," she said. "You know that. You always make everything about yourself." That was Renee's special skill. She could turn any wound into a reflection issue. She laughed when I asked why they needed it. It's temporary, she said. The market will improve. What if it doesn't? It will. That isn't an answer, she sighed. You're making this dramatic. I remember setting the phone down and staring at it for a long time after that call, feeling something in me go very still. The real trouble began in spring. There was a week when Daniel called 3 times in 2 days and didn't leave a voicemail. Renee texted me pictures of my grandchildren with messages like, "Wish you could help with school stuff this week," and then, in the same breath, sent me a link to a condo listing with the note, "Imagine how much easier life would be here." Easier for whom? Then one Thursday afternoon, while I was helping a customer pick out a trellis, I heard my name spoken from the front of the store. Maggie? I turned and saw an old friend of my late husband's standing there in a raincoat with his hat in his hand. Harold Benson had worked with Frank in city maintenance for nearly 20 years. He was broad-shouldered, quiet, and one of those men whose eyes always looked like they had seen too much and said too little. We stepped aside near the displays of hanging baskets. He looked uncomfortable, which made me uncomfortable. "I almost didn't say anything," he admitted. "But I think you should know. Your daughter was here with a realtor last week." I felt my throat tighten. "What?" "She was measuring the front porch. I only caught part of it, but the realtor said something about market value and quick turnaround. For a moment, the store sound around me went fuzzy, like I had been dunked underwater. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I'm sure it was her." I forced a smile. "Thank you for telling me." He touched the brim of his hat, clearly wishing he hadn't gotten involved. "Frank would have wanted you to know. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with all the lights on and went through every bank statement I could find, every folder in the drawer, every envelope tucked into the little basket by the phone. I wasn't confused or forgetful. I was simply exhausted by people assuming old meant helpless. Near dawn, I found something I'd never paid attention to before. A paper from my husband's lawyer, filed 3 years earlier, shortly before Frank died. It was tucked into a folder labeled Taxes, 2023 inches, Frank's neat handwriting. Frank had always had the maddening habit of sorting things so well that you didn't notice them unless you were looking very closely. The document was a property trust. I read it twice, then a third time, because I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. Frank had purchased a small duplex in the next county years earlier. I had known vaguely about the property because he once mentioned wanting to invest for security, but I had never looked into it. The rent money had gone into a separate account managed through the lawyer. According to the trust, the property had been left entirely to me. There was a note in Frank's own handwriting on the final page. "Maggie, if the kids get too interested in our roof before I'm cold, go straight to Nora Pierce. She'll know what to do." I sat in the kitchen with my hands shaking and stared at those words until the sun came up. Nora Pierce was an attorney I had met exactly once at a church fundraiser. Sharp, kind, and completely unimpressed by family drama. Frank and I had apparently spoken to her years ago about protecting certain assets in case of illness or pressure. I remembered now that he had once said, half joking, "I trust you with the house, but I don't trust anybody else with my peace." Frank had prepared for this, not because he expected me to fail, but because he understood our children better than I did. I called Nora that morning. She met me in her office at 10, a modest suite above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and coffee. She listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. The job, the jokes, the questions, the realtor, the property trust. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "Margaret," she said, "has anyone tried to get you to sign anything lately?" I thought of Daniel with a manila envelope 2 weeks earlier, saying it was just some paperwork for the utility transfer, and of Renee asking me to initial a medical release form for a specialist appointment she had conveniently offered to schedule. A coldness moved through me. "Yes," I said. Nora's expression changed in a way I didn't like. "Did you sign?" "No." "Good." "Why?" She took a breath. "Because some of the language in that paperwork you described doesn't sound like utilities to me. It sounds like they were trying to set up access to your accounts and possibly create a legal pathway for decision-making authority. Not necessarily guardianship yet, but the groundwork." For a second, I couldn't speak. "You're telling me my own children tried to maneuver around me?" "I'm telling you they may have been trying to make decisions on your behalf without your full understanding." The room felt too small. Why would they do that? Nora gave me a tired, knowing look. Sometimes people convince themselves they're helping. Sometimes they want control. Sometimes they want money. Often it's all three. I should have cried. Instead, I laughed once, harsh and bitter, because the alternative was to break apart in a stranger's office. So what do? Nothing dramatic, she said. For now, we protect you. We tighten every account. We document everything. And you stop discussing your finances with them. What about the property? She smiled then, not kindly, but with the satisfaction of someone who has seen a trap before and knows exactly how to spring it back. Your husband did a very careful thing. That duplex is now a shield. A shield. That word stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, I changed bank passwords, removed names from accounts, froze unnecessary access, and started keeping copies of every message my children sent. If they wanted to talk about me as though I were fading, I would make sure there was proof that I was very much awake. At the store, I worked harder than ever. The people there became my lifeline. Tessa noticed when I was quiet and never pushed. But she did once slide me a cup of tea and say, "Whatever's going on, you've got a face like you're holding up a building." I nearly cried at that kindness alone. Meanwhile, Daniel and Renee began acting even stranger. Daniel started showing up at the house earlier in the day, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. He'd look around the living room, at the bookshelves, at the framed photos on the mantel, as though measuring what might fit where. Renee became sweet in a way that made my skin crawl. She brought over flowers I didn't ask for and fixed my curtains with a little too much enthusiasm. One afternoon, she casually said, "It must be hard managing everything alone." I told her, "I'm not alone. I have friends." She blinked, surprised that I had said it. Then came the morning I heard them in my driveway. I had just gotten back from Willow and Root with a bag of soil and a small tray of herbs. Daniel's truck was parked crooked in front of the house. Renee's SUV sat behind it. They had not called. They had not asked. They were standing on my porch when I climbed the steps, and the look on Daniel's face told me at once that this was not a social call. "We need to talk," he said. My body went tight. "About what?" Renee stepped forward with an expression I had seen only once before. The day our cat died and she wanted to avoid being the one to bury it. Fear dressed up as concern. "It's about the house, Mom." There it was. Daniel crossed his arms. "The roof is older than you think. The neighborhood's changing. You'd be better off selling now while the market's good." "I'm not selling." "You haven't even heard the plan," Renee said. "I don't need a plan." Daniel's jaw twitched. "Then hear this. You're making it harder than it has to be." I looked from one to the other. Who is this really for? Renee gave me a shocked look, as though I had accused her of something obscene. "For you, obviously. You've got a realtor measuring my porch." Silence. Daniel's face hardened. "Harold doesn't know what he saw." "Harold Benson has known me since before you were born," I said. "He knows exactly what he saw." Renee stepped closer, dropping her voice. "Mom, please. This isn't about us taking anything. We're trying to protect you." "From what?" She looked at Daniel, then back at me. "From mistakes." I laughed then, and it came out ugly. "You mean from me?" Daniel threw his hands up. "Fine. Yes, from you. Because you're not thinking clearly." That did it. That was the sentence. I remember feeling very calm, almost detached, as I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. "Say that again," I told him. His face changed. Renee's eyes widened. "Mom, don't be ridiculous." "No," I said. I'd like him to repeat it. Neither of them said a word. I told them to get off my porch. Daniel stepped toward me, anger flashing hot across his face. But then he saw something in mine that stopped him. Maybe it was because I wasn't trembling. Maybe it was because I had finally passed the point of being scared of my own children. "You're going to regret this," he muttered. I looked him in the eye and said, "No, Daniel, I think you are." They left, tires spitting gravel as they backed out of the driveway. I stood there long after they were gone, holding my phone with a recording running that had caught every word. That night, I sent Nora the file. It was after that confrontation that I finally understood the shape of the trap my children had been building around me. Renee had not only been talking to a realtor, She had also been speaking with an elder care consultant her husband's cousin knew. Daniel had been asking questions at my bank about helping an aging parent stay organized. He had presented himself as concerned. He had asked one of the tellers whether I had memory issues. The teller, bless her, remembered my face and later told Nora what had happened. I was not being paranoid. I was being targeted. For what? That was the question that burned hottest. Money, of course. The house. The savings. The duplex. The trust they didn't know about. But there was something else too, something more humiliating. They wanted the right to tell the story of my old age before I could tell it myself. They wanted to become the heroes of a narrative in which I was fading, failing, and therefore easy to move. The reason they came to me 6 months later, begging, was because the bottom had started to crack beneath them. Daniel's construction business had been losing money for months. Not just a little, a lot. He had taken on one project too many, borrowed against another, and used funds from a client deposit to cover payroll on the promise that a new payment would come through in time. It didn't. Then a city inspector caught a permit issue on a job that had already been billed. Then taxes came due. Renee and her husband were behind on their mortgage after his company downsized him, and his severance evaporated in a cloud of credit card debt and bad timing. And the worst part? They still believed they could come to me and ask me to save them. The 6-month mark arrived on a rainy Thursday in August. I was in the back room at Willow and Root, labeling holiday planters, when Tessa came in and said there were 2 people at the front asking for me. She didn't look worried. She looked annoyed. "I told them you were at lunch," she said. "They said they'd wait. I knew before I got there who it was." Daniel stood by the register with rain on his shoulders and his face drawn tight. Renee looked thinner, her makeup a little smudged, her eyes too bright. They both looked like they had spent the previous night arguing with someone who had finally stopped listening. When they saw me in my apron, carrying a stack of price tags, Daniel swallowed hard. "Mom?" he said. I looked at them and waited. Renee rushed the first words out. "We need to talk." I glanced at Tessa, who was pretending not to listen while actually listening to everything. "I'm working. It's important," Daniel said. "Yes," I said. "That's why you should have called first." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Can we go somewhere private?" "No." That one landed badly. Renee's voice took on that pleading edge she used whenever she wanted people to confuse her desperation with sincerity. "Please, Mom, we're in trouble." I almost felt sorry for them then. Almost. "What kind of trouble?" Daniel looked down. "The business is short." "How short?" He hesitated. "Enough." Enough is not a number. Renee stepped in. "We need help, just temporary. We can pay you back." There it was again. Help. Temporary. Pay you back. The holy trinity of family excuses. I folded my hands in front of me. "You asked me to sell my house. You questioned my judgment. You tried to get access to my accounts. Now you're standing in my workplace asking me to save you." Renee's face flushed. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is the way you spoke to me for 6 months." Daniel's jaw clenched. "We didn't mean it that way. You meant every word." He looked away. Renee's eyes filled with tears, and I realized, with a strange, distant ache, that she was not crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she was afraid of losing the person she'd decided was useful. Her voice dropped. "We're going to lose everything." I studied her face. Once, when she was 7, she had come home with a broken arm because she tried to climb a tree wearing church shoes. She had cried then for real, without an audience, and I had held her through the night while she slept with a fever. I remembered that child. I was still searching for her in the woman standing before me. "What exactly do you want?" I asked. Daniel spoke fast. Too fast. "A loan. Or a signature. Or maybe just to delay things until we can sell the cabin." "What cabin?" He froze. Renee looked sharply at him. That was new information to me, and apparently to her too. I turned to Daniel. "What cabin?" He swallowed. "It's just a small place. We invested in it." "You mean you bought property you never told me about while telling me I needed to sell my house?" No one answered. Tessa walked by with an armful of hanging baskets and, bless her, somehow managed not to trip over the silence. I took a breath and made a decision I had been building toward for weeks. Come to my house after work, I said. Both of you. There's something you need to see. They exchanged a look, hope rising in them like a reflex. By 6:30, they were on my porch again. This time I let them in. I sat them at my kitchen table under the same pendant light that had watched over 1,000 family meals, homework sessions, holiday arguments, and quiet cups of tea after funerals. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and wet rain. The whole scene had the feel of a memory about to become a verdict. I placed a folder in front of them. Renee's eyes darted to it. What is this? Read. Daniel opened it first. I watched the color drain from his face. The duplex trust, the property records, the bank statements, the recorded transcription from the teller's complaint, the copy of the voicemail he had left asking whether I had been checked out lately, the text messages Renee had sent to the realtor, the signed request forms they had tried to slip past me. Every piece of paper was a thread. Together, they formed a rope. Renee covered her mouth. You went through my messages? She whispered. I met her gaze. You went through my life. Daniel looked up, furious now. Because anger is what people reach for when they realize the floor has disappeared beneath them. You had no right. I nearly laughed. No right? You were trying to make decisions for me while pretending I was losing mine. You asked my bank questions behind my back. You brought a realtor to my porch. You thought I wouldn't notice because I was old. He slammed the folder shut, and the papers inside jumped. This is insane. No, I said. This is documentation. Renee's voice was barely audible. Mom, please. I looked at her for a long time. Do you know what hurts most? She shook her head, tears spilling now for real, or at least close enough to real to be useful. It isn't that you wanted money, I said. It's that you started with contempt. You laughed before you lied. You called my work embarrassing before you called me useful. You didn't just want my help, you wanted me small. Daniel stood up so abruptly his chair tipped back. You're acting like we're criminals. I'm acting like a woman who learned to read the room before it was too late. He stared at me, chest heaving, and I could see the exact instant he understood that I was not going to hand him what he wanted. Not because I didn't have it, because I finally understood the difference between helping and surrendering. You'd let us lose the house? Renee cried. I stood as well. You didn't mind asking me to lose mine. That was the moment she began to cry in earnest, shoulders shaking, face blotchy with shock. Daniel looked from her to me, then back again, and I could see the old family pattern trying to reassert itself. He wanted me to fold. He wanted me to smooth it over. He wanted me to become the mother who made all things survivable, but I had already spent too many years being the person who absorbed everybody else's bad choices. No, I said softly. I will not rescue you from a fire you helped start. Daniel's voice cracked. What do you want from us? The answer was so simple it almost broke my heart. Truth, I said. Apologies that don't come with conditions. And distance, until you learn the difference between love and entitlement. He looked at me as though I had slapped him. I already called Nora, I continued. The bank is protected. The property is protected. If there are any more attempts to use my name, they'll be handled legally. Renee made a small sound, half gasp, half sob. You'd really do that? I thought of all the nights I had sat alone in this house, wondering whether loneliness was the price of becoming invisible. I thought of Frank's note. I thought of the way my children had smiled while circling me like birds around something weak. Yes, I said. I really would. They left without finishing the conversation. For a week after that, nobody called. The silence felt strange, but not empty in the old way. More like a room after furniture has been moved. The shape is still familiar, but the pressure points are gone. Nora handled the legal side with a calm competence that made me grateful Frank had trusted her. The tellers at the bank documented the questions Daniel had asked. The realtor admitted, under pressure, that Renee had mentioned her mother's declining memory, which was enough to get everyone's attention. There wasn't enough to send anyone to prison. Not for what they had done to me, but there was enough to force consequences into daylight. Daniel's business accounts were audited after a client complaint. He had to make repayment arrangements for the deposit money he'd used improperly. One of his biggest clients pulled out, then another. A contractor who'd been quietly covering for him decided he no longer wanted his name anywhere near a mess that might end in court. Daniel sold the truck. Then, he sold the cabin he'd hidden from me. Then, eventually, he filed for bankruptcy. Renee and her husband missed 2 mortgage payments and had to move into a rental apartment on the edge of town. Her husband's family, who had once encouraged all of this from a safe distance, suddenly became less enthusiastic when the money stopped flowing. Renee lost the polished shine she'd worn so confidently when she thought I was too tired to notice her hands in my pockets. I didn't dance at their downfall. That would be a lie. What I felt was quieter and, in some ways, sadder. I felt vindicated. I felt sorrow. I felt the strange grief of watching your children become strangers and then being forced to admit they had done it to themselves. One afternoon in early September, about a month after the porch confrontation, I got a call from my grandson Eli. He was 16, bright, awkward, and far too kind for the family he had been born into. He asked me if I had a minute, then said in a small voice, "Grandma, are you mad at us?" Us? That word nearly undid me. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm upset with some of the things adults did. Not with you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom says she messed up." I closed my eyes. "Did she mean it?" I asked. "I think so," he said. "Dad's really stressed. Everyone's yelling all the time. There was no point pretending I didn't know. Tell me the truth," I said. "Are you okay?" He gave me that half-embarrassed teenage sigh. "I'm okay. Just tired." I invited him for lunch the next day. He came, ate 3 sandwiches, and talked to me about school, robotics, and how the history teacher made everyone want to scream by assigning essays right before homecoming. We didn't talk about his parents for more than a minute, but when he left, he hugged me so hard I had to blink back tears in the doorway. That visit changed something in me. I realized then that not every branch on a broken tree has to fall the same way. Some of them still reach for light. So I made a decision. I took the money from the duplex trust, plus the modest earnings from my job, and I did something I knew Frank would have loved. I created a scholarship fund through the local community center for women over 55 who wanted to return to work, retrain, or start something new. The paperwork was handled through Nora. Tessa helped me write the announcement. Dolores designed the flyer. Mr. Alvarez brought cookies to the first meeting like it was a holiday. We called it the Second Bloom Fund. The name made me smile every time I said it. At first, I thought it would be a small thing. But word spread quickly. Women came in from all over the county widows. Divorcees, former nurses, teachers, warehouse workers, grandmothers who had spent years making themselves smaller than they were allowed to be. They came in with shaky voices and tired hands and left with notebooks, job leads, and a little more backbone than they'd arrived with. Working at Willow and Root became more than a job. It became a place where I got to watch people remember themselves. And as for my own house, I kept it. I painted the front door, a deep blue Frank would have teased me for loving. I replaced the porch light. I planted lavender in the front beds because I liked the smell and because it made the neighbors stop long enough to say hello. I bought myself a new couch, not because the old one was broken, but because I could. I learned how to video call. I tried Thai food. I went to a concert in the park with Dolores and danced badly on purpose just because it felt good to move without apologizing. The change in my children came slower. Daniel called first. He didn't apologize the way people do in movies, with a single perfect speech and a tear running down one cheek. Real remorse is uglier than that. He called after a court notice about the business loan and asked if he could see me. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop. He looked older than he had 6 months earlier. Not physically. Something deeper. A man who had spent too long believing strain was a substitute for integrity. "I was under pressure," he said, staring into his cup. "So was I replied. He swallowed. "I thought I was helping." "You thought you were entitled." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "I'm not proud of what I did," he said. "That's a start." He looked up then, eyes wet, and for the first time in years I saw the boy he had been before money, ego, and panic taught him to perform adulthood instead of living it. "I don't know how to fix it," he admitted. "No," I said. "You don't get to fix it by making it my job." You fix it by living differently. He nodded once. Slowly. Renee took longer. Her pride was always heavier than her shame. But she eventually came too. After her husband's family situation collapsed, and she finally ran out of people willing to pretend everything was normal. She cried in my kitchen for 20 minutes without speaking. When she finally looked up, she said, "I was jealous." The honesty startled me more than the confession itself. "Of what?" I asked. "Of you," she whispered. "You were always the steady one. And after Dad died, I didn't know how to look at you without feeling like I'd failed somehow. That was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was real. I told her the truth I should have said years ago. I never needed perfect children, I said. I needed decent ones." She broke down again. And for the first time since all of this began, I reached across the table and took her hand. Not because the hurt was gone, because the boundary had already been drawn. In the end, that was the real revenge. Though I don't like the word. It sounds too harsh, too deliberate. What happened to them was not a curse. It was consequence. My family laughed when I took a part-time job at 68 because they believed age made me fragile, and fragility made me manageable. They thought I had become an inconvenience they could organize around. They thought they could write the ending before I had finished the middle. Instead, the job gave me back my voice. It gave me witnesses. It gave me confidence. It gave me the habit of leaving the house with purpose instead of apology. Most of all, it gave me the clarity to see that love without respect is just another kind of theft. 6 months after they mocked me on that porch, they came to me for help. And I did help, just not in the way they expected. I helped them face the truth. I helped them meet the consequences of what they had done. I helped my grandson keep his faith in me, and I helped myself remember that I had not survived 68 years on this earth just to become easy to use at the end. Last Christmas, the house was full again, but different. Better, maybe. Eli brought his girlfriend and helped me hang the lights. Dolores came over with her famous cinnamon bars. Tessa and Bree stopped by after work. Even Nora joined us for dinner, carrying a pie she insisted she hadn't bought from the bakery downstairs, though nobody believed her. Daniel arrived late, carrying nothing but a nervous expression and a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a receipt for the first full payment he'd made toward his debt. Renee brought flowers and, for once, no agenda. We ate. We talked. We argued a little. We laughed more than I thought we would. At one point, after the plates had been cleared and the room had settled into that warm, sleepy hum families only get when the worst of the storm has finally passed, Eli looked around the table and said, "This feels like home." I turned toward the window then, where the porch light shone blue against the winter dark, and I thought of Frank, of all the years we had spent building a life sturdy enough to survive the people who might one day forget how to honor it. "Yes," I said softly. "It does." And this time, nobody laughed.